The airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Boarding announcements crackling over the speakers, travelers rushing to their gates, and rolling suitcases humming against the tile floor. Among the crowd stood Lisa Carter, a confident, well-dressed, black woman in her early 40s scrolling through her phone as she waited for her flight. She was used to traveling. After all, she was the CEO of one of the largest airline companies in the country. But today, she wasn't flying as an executive. No first-class ticket, no assistant at her side. Just her, blending in with the passengers, observing. Lisa believed in knowing how her company truly operated from the ground up, which is why she often went undercover as an ordinary traveler. Most of her employees had no idea who she really was. It gave her a raw, unfiltered look at how customers were treated, and unfortunately, she was about to witness something that would shake her to the core. As she approached the boarding gate, the pilot himself stood nearby, chatting with a flight attendant. He was tall, middle-aged, with a confident but slightly dismissive air about him. When Lisa handed her ticket to the agent, the pilot's eyes flickered toward her, and his expression shifted. His lips tightened, his brow furrowed, and then, "Excuse me, ma'am," he interrupted, stepping forward. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Lisa raised an eyebrow, glancing down at her perfectly valid boarding pass. "Yes, this is my flight," she said, keeping her tone even. The pilot's smile was thin, forced. "I think there might be some mistake," he said. "This section is for priority passengers." For a moment, Lisa just stood there, processing. His words. He hadn't asked for her name, hadn't checked her ticket. His assumption was clear, but instead of arguing, she simply tilted her head and studied him, memorizing every detail of his face. He had no idea who she was. Not yet. Before she could respond, a commotion nearby pulled everyone's attention. A young black teenager, no older than 17, was giving up his seat in the crowded waiting area for a visibly pregnant white woman. She looked surprised, then touched by the gesture. As she settled into the seat, she smiled warmly at the boy and reached into her purse. "I want you to have this," she said, slipping a folded note into his hand. "Read it later." The boy blinked in confusion but nodded, tucking the note into his pocket. He had no idea that what was written inside would change his life forever. Back at the gate, Lisa took a deep breath, turning her attention back to the pilot. "You're right," she finally said, her voice cool but steady. "There is a mistake, but it's not mine." And with that, she stepped forward, leaving the stunned pilot frozen in place, completely unaware that the woman he'd just tried to turn away was the one person who held his entire career in her hands. Lisa walked down the jet bridge, her heartbeat steady, her face unreadable. She had dealt with situations like this before, people who made quick judgments, who looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. But this time, it felt different. Maybe it was the confidence in the pilot's voice, the way he hadn't hesitated for even a second before questioning her presence. It wasn't just about her. It was about how many others like her had faced the same treatment, with no one to hold people accountable. She stepped onto the plane and moved to her seat in business class. As she settled in, she noticed the pilot boarding a few minutes later, greeting passengers with a broad, practiced smile. He didn't look her way, and she didn't expect him to. Not yet. Lisa had spent years building her airline company from the ground up. She knew every detail of how it functioned, from customer service to maintenance, from the crew's responsibilities to the experience passengers should have. She had fought hard to create an airline that prided itself on excellence and fairness. But incidents like this made her wonder how much still needed to change. She pulled out her phone and made a quick note to herself. Not about the pilot, she already had plans for that, but about something bigger. A shift in company policy. An initiative that would ensure what just happened to her wouldn't happen to others. But for now, she would wait. Observe. Let the pilot continue his shift, completely unaware that his every move was being watched by the very person who had the power to decide his future. A few rows behind her, the young teenager who had given up his seat earlier finally had a moment to check the note the pregnant woman had given him. He pulled it from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. His name was Jordan, and he was on his way home after visiting his grandmother. He wasn't used to getting much attention. He was the kind of person who stayed in the background, keeping to himself. He had only given up his seat because it felt like the right thing to do. He never expected anything in return. As he read the note, his eyes widened. The words were simple, but they carried a weight he couldn't ignore. I saw what you did. The world needs more people like you. Call this number when you land. It could change your life. At the bottom was a phone number and a name. He read it twice, his heart starting to race. He had heard that name before. It belonged to someone important, someone powerful. But why? Would she? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of passengers getting settled, the flight attendants making their final checks. He carefully folded the note and tucked it back into his pocket, glancing toward the front of the plane. He had no idea that this flight, this moment, was going to be the start of something much bigger than he ever imagined. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Lisa kept her gaze out the window, her mind already working through the next steps. She had built her career by trusting her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that today was going to be a turning point. Not just for her, but for a lot of people on this plane. And the pilot. He still had no idea that the decision he made at the gate would soon come back to him in a way he never saw coming. The engines roared to life, and the plane began taxiing down the runway. Lisa leaned back in her seat, her hands resting lightly on her lap, but her mind was far from at ease. She had spent years building her airline into a company that valued fairness and respect, and yet here she was, faced with the kind of bias that was supposed to have no place in her business. The pilot hadn't even second-guessed himself when he tried to deny her entry. He had looked at her and made an assumption just like that. She turned her head slightly, watching as the flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts and making sure everything was in place. Most of them were focused on their work, but Lisa caught a glimpse of the pilot standing near the cockpit door, chatting with one of them. He was relaxed, completely unaware of the storm that was about to come his way. A few rows back, Jordan was still holding the note in his pocket, his fingers brushing against the paper. He felt like he was holding a secret too big to understand. The name on the note, it belonged to someone he had seen in the news before, someone with influence, someone whose words carried weight. He had never expected that one small act, giving up his seat, would catch the attention of someone like that. He thought about calling the number as soon as they landed, but doubt crept in. What if it wasn't real? What if it was some kind of mistake? Or worse, a joke? His life had never been the kind where things like this happened. He had grown up being told to expect less, to work hard, but never assume anyone would notice. And yet here he was, holding a note that suggested otherwise. The flight smoothed out as they reached cruising altitude, and Lisa turned her attention to the in-flight announcements. The pilot's voice came over the speakers, steady and professional. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're looking at a smooth flight today, expected to arrive right on time. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." Lisa let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. She had heard that kind of voice before, the kind that carried authority, that made people trust without question. But she also knew that tone could hide things, assumptions, bias, even mistakes. And today she had no intention of letting this one go unchecked. A few rows up, another passenger had been watching the interaction at the gate earlier. An older woman, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, had noticed how the pilot had stopped Lisa. She had seen the hesitation in his eyes, the way he had stepped in before even checking her ticket. The woman had seen things like that before, and she had always hated how quickly people dismissed it, how often it was brushed off as a misunderstanding. She adjusted her glasses and glanced toward Lisa, as if debating whether to say something. But Lisa, still calm, still unreadable, gave nothing away. The woman decided to wait, to watch, because something told her this wasn't over. Jordan shifted in his seat, pulling out his phone and staring at the dark screen. He had no service, mid-flight, but he kept looking at it anyway, as if he could will the number on the note to mean something. He thought about the woman who had given it to him, how kind her eyes had been, how sincere her voice had sounded when she said it could change his life. What did she mean by that? A job, a scholarship, an opportunity? He didn't know, but what if, just this once, something big was meant for him? In the cockpit, the pilot leaned back, stretching his shoulders. It had been an easy takeoff and everything was running smoothly. He glanced at the flight manifest, not paying much attention to the names on it. He didn't know that just a few rows behind him sat the CEO of the very airline he worked for. He didn't know that his decision at the gate had already set off a chain of events that would change everything. And he certainly didn't know that by the time they landed, the balance of power on this flight would shift in a way he never expected. The hum of the plane filled the cabin, but inside Lisa's mind a different kind of noise was growing. She had spent the last hour quietly observing, watching the crew, noting the interactions, listening to the way passengers were treated. It wasn't just about the pilot's actions at the gate anymore. It was about the bigger picture, about what this moment represented. She had built this airline on the promise of fair treatment for all, but what she had just experienced firsthand told her there was still work to be done. She glanced toward the front of the cabin. The pilot hadn't looked her way once since. They took off, which wasn't surprising. He had probably already forgotten about her. She, however, had not forgotten about him. Every now and then, one of the flight attendants passed by, checking on passengers, and Lisa could tell they were well trained, polite, efficient. But how much of their behavior was a reflection of leadership? A company's culture always started at the top, and right now she wasn't sure she liked what she was seeing. A few rows behind her, Jordan was gripping his phone tightly, his knee bouncing up and down. He couldn't stop thinking about the note in his pocket. The name on it was real. He had looked it up in the in-flight magazine, scrolling past the pages until he found an article that confirmed it. The woman who had handed him the note was a business executive, someone powerful, someone who could actually change lives. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this a job offer, a scholarship, a chance to prove himself in a way he had never been able to before? He had always been the kid who worked hard but went unnoticed. He had dreams, but dreams didn't mean much when you didn't have the right opportunities. And now, sitting here on this flight, it felt like an opportunity had landed in his lap. But was it real? Lisa noticed the shift in energy a few rows back. The young man who had given up his seat earlier looked restless, like he was on the verge of making a decision that would change everything. She didn't know his story yet, but she could tell. He was carrying something, a weight, a choice. And she understood that feeling better than most. Just then, a voice crackled over the intercom. It was the pilot again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." Lisa exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders settle in. The moment she had been waiting for was almost here. The plane would land, passengers would gather their belongings, and most of them would walk off, thinking this was just another ordinary flight. But for at least 3 people on board, everything was about to change.